Welcome, everybody, to the Soul of the Unexplained. And today I am joined, as always, by my awesome co host and co creator, my brother from another mother, Mr. Roger Stokes. How are you doing, Roger?
Hey, I am doing great. It's been a fantastic week, and we had a couple episodes. One, again, we picked up Skinwalker Ranch this past week as it had 1 week off, and also the return of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. So, yeah, I'm excited to jump in and discuss both tonight to kind of kick off a two for one.
Absolutely. And folks, that's kind of what you're getting tonight. You're getting two for the price of one. We're going to start off doing our weekly recap of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, episode number 6 of season 5. And of course, this episode of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch is titled Beaming Up. And after that, we're also going to talk about episode number 1 of season 2 of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. So sorry, folks. I know that Roger and I were hoping to do another recap of 5 minutes or less of the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, or maybe even a 10 or 15 minute recap. But
There's just too much that happens.
yeah, that's not going to
It's
happen,
really
unfortunately.
difficult. So,
So, Roger, let me go ahead and put my four eyes on here, and we'll start reading from our synopsis here, and we'll start dissecting episode number 6 of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, Beaming Up. So the episode begins with Caleb introducing the team to Mike and Alex from Mark Construction. And Thomas has brought this company called Mark Construction Drilling to the ranch to begin a new series of horizontal drilling into the mesa. And Mark Construction brings with them the capability of drilling with a force of up to 60,000 pounds. Now, Roger, that's 30 tons. And not only is that approximately how many tacos I can eat in one setting, but that's the most powerful drill that they brought on the ranch thus far, with the capability of exerting up to 60,000 pounds of pressure. Pretty significant there. And so Travis then discusses how the past two horizontal drilling efforts designed to get more information on that 400-foot long domed object buried in the mesa have been unsuccessful. And neither of the previous operations were able to penetrate deep enough into the mesa. Travis then mentions how the first horizontal drilling attempt by, if you'll recall, Aaron Blunt and Sure Shot Drilling, and that would have been from seasons 3 and 4, I believe, yielded metal fragments from inside the mesa. And if you recall, folks, those were the metal flakes that they got from the spoils that they had analyzed by the University of Utah. And it was determined that these metal flakes were composed of the elements tellurium and europium. And of course, the significant thing about that is that they were fused together in a non-natural process, you would say. And it was basically these are the same type of setup that we see on heat shielding tiles of aircraft and spacecraft that re-enter the Earth's atmosphere after having gone into orbit. So we all remember that, and pretty significant there. So Eric shows the team Jan Franke's 3D rendering of the objects inside the mesa. You know, the debris field, as they called it, plus the larger object. And Eric explains to Alex and Mike how they hope to drill on either side of the large dome-shaped anomaly and send instruments into the borehole to get a better look at this anomaly and determine a way to possibly excavate it, or if it even is possible to excavate it. And so what they want to do is they want to create, again, boreholes on either side of the anomaly on the east and west sides of the object, and essentially inject like a concrete gel encased casing, if you will, in the boreholes, that they can then send instruments and sensors down in order to get a better analysis of the object. And Eric says, quote, this will give us an opportunity to better understand whether it is of natural or possible technological origins, close quote. The stated goal is to make boreholes that are eventually 18 inches in diameter, so about yay wide or so, and large enough to send the necessary equipment into. Travis then says that working up to 18 inches for each borehole would be perfect. If you can do that on both sides of the anomaly, they can put a transmitter on one side and a receiver on the other and go up through there with a robot or something and pull it through the borehole. Eric then says if anything if everything goes according to plan, they'll have two boreholes that would enable them to perform something akin to an X-ray or a CAT scan, CT scan of the anomaly, and really give them an understanding of whether they're dealing with a natural feature or something far more interesting. And so, Roger, that's kind of the where the episode begins, where they're bringing in this new team of drillers with this significantly more powerful drill that they more so than any other drill that they've had on the property up to this point. And the hope is to go on either side of the anomaly horizontally into the mesa and then angle it upwards so that they can kind of get a reading on either side of it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think like this was based off of the previous years and what they were able to accomplish or not accomplish. Um, I think that they prepared themselves really, really well to, especially with Jan Franke's scan and what looks like the debris field. I really feel like them bringing this drill onto Skinwalker Ranch, um, which has the power to push up through there and really, go up the mesa, but it's still minimally evasive, right? We're not tearing apart the mesa, and it I think it was strategic in saying that we now have the confidence and ability to bring in heavier equipment, and this is something that will, you know, enable them to punch up through, like you talked about, and get, especially with the two tunnels running up there and sensors going up, theoretically getting an X-ray or, like you said, a CT scan of what is there. And, I think it was an exciting way to start setting up because now we have some real power behind us. And, it's always exciting for me, when they drill into the mesa. And, it's always, I know in the past, like you recently, or just discussed the kind of the spoils and things coming out and things that potentially, we know that, if it's used together, this is something that's man-made, so it leads to a lot of, I think, those theories out there of, could this be spacecraft, right? What is it? Is it alien in nature? Is it from this Earth? Is it a meteorite? I mean, who knows, right? But I think at this point, I was really happy to see that they had devised a plan and thought about it to get into the mesa, um, and start a really good experiment. But as you know, and the ranch has a mind of its own, and it seems to like to play with them. So,
Absolutely. And so then what happens is Mark Construction, the drilling team, return 2 days later to begin drilling horizontally into the mesa. And they decide to start that new borehole instead of using the previous one made a year prior by Aaron Blunt and Sure Shot. Eric then says, quote, just behind the drilling head on the end of the rod, we have a beacon, an electronic device that broadcasts a signal up through the mesa to the receiver, providing information about the elevation, the direction or inclination, as well as the temperature of the drill head itself, close quote. And Travis is monitoring the beacon signal on the drill head. And as the drill head begins drilling into the mesa, almost immediately, or so it seems, they begin detecting a different signal from the one coming from the drill beacon. And 31 megahertz, I believe, is the frequency of the signal. And Travis determines that the signal is coming from inside the mesa, right at the drill site. Their antenna tells them the signal is coming from inside the mesa, and they have no idea what could be causing the signal. And just then, Jared Ledniski, the drill operator for Mark Construction, tells the team that the drill has stopped moving into the mesa. Big shock, big surprise there, right?
Right,
And
right.
so Thomas then tells us that the drill has started angling upwards and is going too steep of a grade inside the mesa. And what this means is that they're unable to steer the drill bit around like they would like to. And it's as if some kind of force is bending the drill upwards and away from the object. And Travis and Caleb are back at the monitoring station listening to the frequency coming from inside the mesa. And Caleb mentions that it sounds just like what they heard in the East Field not too long prior to that. And of course, Travis concurs. Now, that is in reference to an experiment they ran in the East Field where they heard the exact same kind of electronic warbling sound as though it were some kind of two-way communication. And like this signal, it too was coming from inside the mesa, if I'm not mistaken. So back on the mesa, Thomas and Alex from Mark Construction take another reading from the receiver to determine where the drill bit is. And it turns out that it's indicating that it's literally right beneath the rock they're currently standing on the slope of the mesa. In other words, the drill bit is going up too steep and is in danger of actually popping out of the upward slope of the mesa. So the problem with the drill um, starting to climb too deep began happening at about 40 feet into the side of the mesa. And they'd been applying a pressure of anywhere between 12,000 to 14,000 pounds. So that's about 6 to 7 tons of constant pressure being applied by the drill. And Alex confirms that the drill bit is hitting something hard that it just cannot penetrate. And Roger, this is something that we've seen before on Skinwalker Ranch, is it not?
Yes, they ran into the very same issue previously. And what I find interesting with that is so Dr. Travis Taylor described before when they were drilling and they hit into a hard surface. It didn't mark typically with the force and the pressure of a drill going that hard and not being able to move, you would get some wear and tear on that drill. Um, when they pulled out the drill previously, that drill bit was looked brand spanking new, like it hadn't done anything, and it was cool to the touch. And so the theory proposed by Dr. Travis Taylor was that there's potentially what we would seem very Star Trek like, right? But like a shield that is being generated around whatever is there. And that shield, we just with what is being hit there, we cannot penetrate through that. And so it makes me wonder if that correlates to what is going on there, even though this is a stronger drill, right? Could it be, in theory, and that's why you get maybe that signal that's talking, right? Something there is is happening. Something's preventing drills from going through. And, you know, I've never seen, you know, in all my years here on this earth, if we want to get somewhere and we want to drill into it, we found a way to do it, right? We have the strength, we have the understanding, we have the engineering, we know how to do that. And yet we've come up really short this time on Skinwalker Ranch because we've hit something that theoretically shouldn't be there. And the drill bit behaving in a way where it's being pulled out and there's no wear and tear on it. It doesn't feel like it's even been used at all. And so I'm
And it's and
curious
it's
because
cold. There's no heat on it, right? There's no
yeah, there's no
friction,
heat on it. And
no
usually
apparent
with
friction.
right, so how, it's going to be interesting because one of the things that they did, because there's so much in this episode to unpack, because it's really separated into two parts. Episode 6. So we've got the mesa, and then of course we've got lasers going into the night sky. And I'm really curious to see next week if because they didn't really go into it, and I don't know whether it's just because of the time when they put the episode together, but really if when they pull that drill out, if it actually is the same type of thing that it will not show wear and tear on that drill. Um, Another thing that I was thinking as well, again, this is just a hypothesis, when because they're trying to drill up there and they get those readings that are saying like if we keep pushing up here because as it's going up, whatever they're hitting against is pushing it up. But what I'm wondering is, could it also be the case that the signal on the beacon or whatever they have is being, where it says like, oh, by the way, it looks like you're like it's pinging, it's going to come up right in the middle of the mesa. What about it? We always have seen in the past, and we know that GPS data is not accurate there, and things don't always show up. So could this possibly be just another way of trying to confuse, our scientists, the people out there on Skinwalker Ranch? Because, right, if they were able to get up and through, so it kind of throws another wrench to it. Like, what is the ranch trying to do? And if there truly is a communication signal going on, who is it communicating with, and how does that affect the actual technology that we are trying to insert and actually be able to take a look at what this thing truly is? Because we get so close, and yet every time something steps up, a combination of things that just don't quite, it just doesn't make sense. And how, like what are these next steps? How are they going to get into that mesa? It's definitely has me excited to learn more and understand. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it kind of plays to that term that we've heard. Uh, I think George Knapp and Colm Kelleher's book was where I first heard the term precognitive sentient non-human intelligence, which is a fancy way of saying that there's something out there on the ranch that seems to be able to know exactly what the team is going to be doing in regards to experiments and is able to foil them in some way, shape, or form by creating some kind of electromagnetic interference or causing equipment failures. I mean, just all kinds of things. So it all actively demonstrates this narrative that's been on the ranch for so long of there being this, you know, whatever you want to call it, this again, this precognitive sentient non-human intelligence. And I do think that's one of the best ways to describe what, it is, because it does seem to be being done deliberately by whatever it is that's behind all these crazy malfunctions and things that we don't understand how they're able to happen. Like the whole thing with the drill bit going back to season 3, where they're drilling horizontally into the mesa and they're able to get these metal flakes, but yet the drill bit itself is cold to the touch when it should be hotter than blazes because it's been the friction alone from boring through the rock and sandstone, and then the fact that the drill bit looked practically brand new, which again led Travis to say, kind of in exasperation, what the heck? Is there some kind of invisible force field around this thing that we just can't penetrate? Because then you're getting into the realm of comic books and science fiction, right? Like you said, Roger, Star Trek, Star Wars. I mean, take your pick. That's the kind of stuff that are tropes and memes that we or themes that we see in modern day science fiction and you know comic books, Marvel Universe movies, what have you. But yet, such an explanation seems like it could potentially fit in something here, which makes it all the more extraordinary. And that's why this whole mystery is so difficult to get your head around.
Yeah, it's definitely strange, and I mean, anytime you're drilling into the mesa, I'm glad that they're not giving up on that. But anytime that happens, there are things that continue to happen. So it makes me wonder again, just what is in that mesa?
Absolutely, it's a certified bona fide mystery without question. So Travis says that it's difficult to understand the whole bit with the mesa, no pun intended, drill bit, because the GPR data indicates that the anomaly is located at least 100 feet deeper inside the mesa than the drill bit was before it began being pushed upward and
Upward,
outward.
yeah.
And Alex and Mike from Mark Construction then determined that it would be best to pull out of that borehole and try again. And this time going deeper into the mesa and perhaps come up underneath the anomaly as opposed to trying to go along either side of it. And the team then decides to empty the spoils from the drill bit to see if there's any metal fragments like they encountered the last time. And sure enough, Roger, they find a small metallic fragment in the spoils. I would say roughly the size of a big kidney stone. And those that know me know that I have more than a little bit of experience in kidney stones. So, I mean, it looked like this little, tiny piece of rock, but they said it appeared to be metal. So they take this little fragment that they think is metal and they place it in a sealed bag and presumably send it off for analysis. And that essentially concludes the drilling for this particular episode. And they then cut to the team at the Triangle welcoming some very familiar faces, right, Roger? Of course, Tim Anderson and his new Salt Laser team, and one of our favorite people, the rock star himself, Mr. Brown Socks, Pete Kelsey, the great technologist of Vecto Labs. They welcome them back to the ranch there at the Triangle. And Tim tells us that this year he's bringing a total of 8 laser space cannons to the ranch, all of which are higher power than the ones that they've used before in previous seasons of the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. Travis then tells us that what they want to do with this new experiment is surround the anomalous area above the triangle with all of the lasers firing skywards directly up through the center of the triangle. And that way, if something does pass through, it should hit one of those lasers, and then they want to pass a laser beam up through the anomaly and also hit like this white screen, all hoping to get a glimpse of something breaking the beams. Again, some unseen, for want of a better term, cloaked object like what we saw last season in season 4 with the Blob. So the purpose of the 12 by 8-foot white screen that Thomas raises up to the 31-foot level is to use a spectrometer to measure any variations in the laser beam's color spectrum, which could indicate more evidence of the so-called blob anomaly up there at the 31 to 40 foot height. Pete Kelsey and Jim Royston from Omnitech will be scanning the entire triangle area with both aerial infrared LiDAR and thermal imaging devices on their drones. The team is also setting up multiple cameras around the perimeter of the triangle to take long exposure photographs of the triangle every few seconds. So, again, if anything passes through those laser beams, they hopefully can capture images of it. And of course, Roger, because it's Skinwalker Ranch, they're going to do what? They're going to launch
They're going to launch
rockets.
rockets. Yeah, of course.
So, before they launch a single rocket or fire up the space cannons, they spot a UAP in the sky. And the UAP is not strobing, or rather, it's not displaying what we would term as standard aviation lights. And it tracks from the north and west and then vanishes, just completely disappears in the sky. While the on-screen presentation of the UAP doesn't really indicate it, Roger, Travis says that it's the biggest and brightest UAP ever documented on the ranch up to this point. And Roger, that's a pretty bold statement for Travis to make, that it's the biggest and brightest UAP ever documented on the ranch up to that point. What do you think about that?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think that because when they at least the way it was filmed and when they showed it, um, I don't think we got the full effect that they saw when when Dr. Taylor was viewing it from the ground, or the people that were viewing it from the ground. But I definitely believe him when he says that like this was the most highly visible UAP coming across the sky. Because in seasons past they've had multiple UAPs appear at night, and he's made similar what I would say is statements around like the luminosity and of what's like clearly not a satellite. It's clearly not what we know as aviation today with blinking lights. And it is truly an unidentified aerial phenomena. And so I find it really, really interesting that to the people on the ground there, that it had that luminosity to say like, wow, what is going on here? Like they hadn't even started that experiment, but all of a sudden things start acting up on a ranch, like, getting ready for whatever is going to happen. So very, very curious.
Yeah, and that's a good point you bring up, Roger, because we want to bear in mind anytime we're watching this video footage of particularly the stuff captured at nighttime, the cameras that the production crew are using are not going to show anywhere near the clarity or the scale, if you will, as what you would see if you were there in person with your own eyes.
Right. Right.
So it's going to be far more impressive in person watching it with your own naked eyes as opposed to, and again, that's not to say that they're not high tech, high quality, high definition cameras that Prometheus is using on this docu series, but it's just the nature of optical reproduction that you're seeing as the viewer that these cameras are filming. So again, while it didn't look as terribly impressive as some of the other UAPs that we've seen previously on the show, for Travis to say that it's the biggest and brightest one they've seen so far, that's that's pretty significant statement for him to be making, and I don't think we should overlook the significance of that.
Yeah, I agree, especially with his background at NASA. At NASA, like it is something to keep in mind that anytime Dr. Taylor says that something's extraordinary, or this is something that like the first time at the ranch we've seen this, or it's been this bright, however you describe those things, those are things to take notice of and keep track of for sure.
Absolutely. So before they launch a single rocket or fire up the space cannons, again they notice that UAP. So they then proceed with the laser. I can
Laser.
I can talk. They fire up the lasers that are pointed at the white screen first, which is located at a height, again, of 31 feet. And it's bright. In fact, Caleb remarks that it's like staring at the sun because of how bright it is. And as Travis monitors the lasers via his spectrometer to measure again any possible fluctuations in the laser's intensity across the spectrum, sure enough, he sees on his spectrometer the green laser all of a sudden gets significantly brighter while the blue laser kind of
Mention.
drops off in intensity and to a considerable amount. Travis then tells us that this laser is programmed to emit light with no variation in its brightness or color. It's consistent. I mean, that's what lasers are. So when he saw the green light was suddenly getting brighter while the blue light started to fade and the colors changed slightly, that meant that something strange at about 31 feet was causing it. Tim from New Salt Laser then gets the 7 big space cannons fired up, shooting again directly straight up into the sky from the center of the triangle. Now, from the command center, Eric radios Travis and asks him what they're seeing on their antennas in the 1.6 gigahertz frequency range, because Eric says that he sees a broadcast source coming from directly behind Homestead number 2. And Eric says that, quote, nothing in that space should account for that. So, of course, he's speaking of
Right.
that broadcast source coming from behind Homestead 2. Travis and Dragon check their antennas, and sure enough, they confirm what Eric is seeing from the command center regarding a signal in that 1.6 gigahertz range broadcasting from behind Homestead 2. And Travis talks about how they consistently detect that 1.6 signal fairly often when they conduct experiments on the ranch, and that the 1.6 signal, more often than not, is a precursor to UAP sightings and other strange phenomena appearing and or happening on the ranch. So, Roger, what went through your mind when they said that there was all of a sudden this phantom broadcasting source directly behind Homestead 2?
You know, it again, things like that excite me because you have what's going on within Homestead too, another another incident of high strangeness, right? You have something that is so they have full-time security there. They have cameras everywhere. Nothing on the ranch at Homestead 2 should be broadcasting a signal, right? And yet they pick this up. And again, like to me, it's a phantom signal. What is it doing? Why is it there? Why is it being broadcast from Homestead 2? That's truly the question. I don't have any speculation as to what specifically it could be, other than the fact that we know when we start messing with things in the triangle, the other parts of the ranch start. It's almost like, as you talked about, a sentient being, right? You've got all of a sudden the right arm's moving, left arm's moving, that are happening all in conjunction based off of what's going on in, right in the space of the triangle, what's going on at that 31-foot level on even higher. And so again, it's one of those questions that I ask myself, Jim, is is that signal that was coming there, is it made by the ranch to confuse the people there more? Or is it is it something that hopefully in the future they can identify? Is it a potential communication source that's going on? Right. And like, again, I don't have the answers to that, but it seems like the ranch is also just throwing up strange things um, that, again, they may not have experienced before, or they have experienced it before, but it's just in a slightly different way. And having that come from Homestead too, um, I mean, it definitely looks like it was caused or it was reacting somehow because of the lasers and the experiment that they were doing. And yeah, I mean, it just makes me think like, is this a communication signal? Is this signaling something else that we don't even understand happening on the ranch?
Absolutely, and we also have to take into account, Roger, the the history of Homestead 2 as it pertains to strange phenomena occurring out in that part of the ranch. There's all kinds of reports of portals opening up out there by Homestead 2, right? And of course, there's the encounter that Jay Stratton had when he visited the ranch during the Bigelow era, when the team that he was out there patrolling the grounds with by Homestead 2, and they encountered that kind of like that wall of cold air. And of course, again, that was, I believe, if I remember the story correctly, that Jay was out there during one of the warm summer months. So you're going to notice if you're walking into, a spot of cold air. And of course, Colonel John Alexander talks about, seeing a portal open up by Homestead 2 and actually seeing a creature of some kind coming out of that portal. So of course, all that is anecdotal. We don't have any actual data from that to back anything up, just simply the eyewitness testimony
Right.
of John Alexander and Jay Stratton. And particularly where Jay Stratton is concerned, somebody who I place a great deal of stock in what he is saying. So,
100%.
again, there is a history behind Homestead 2 for having this bizarre kind of thing happen. So was that by design? Was it broadcasting something to distract them from having their eyes on some other part of the property? We don't know, and it's just pure speculation. But man, how fun is it to speculate, right?
It is, and it almost makes me wonder too, just, I'm gonna throw something out here that could be related, couldn't. Um, but correct me if I'm wrong, but that is Homestead 2 is very near where they were digging in either season one or season two, and they put the dye in the water to see where it would come out, and they never found it, right?
Right.
So it leads me to believe there is running water under the property, and especially if that is true near Homestead 2, um, paranormal investigators, paranormal people that study the paranormal have found that strange things or that high strangeness or, even hauntings, things like that, that we would consider, um, otherworldly happens or tends to happen more when there is an energy source like running water or limestone. And so it really piques my curiosity because how much high strangeness happens there. And if you add that there is clearly running water underneath the property there, and there's clearly something in underneath in the earth that's conductive all around the property, you add all that in with everything that we know about the ranch, you've got yourself a melting pot of boy, what can happen here at any given time, right? So, yeah, I absolutely believe that there are things when people say, yeah, I saw something open up in a portal, or I hit into a wall of cold air, or people have had feelings of fear and things that where they're frightened. And, you know, it's not surprising that the ranch continues to throw things up there. And I think that we're dealing with things that we just don't understand yet. And I hope again that, based on the scientific research that's going on, that we can get some of those answers.
Yeah, I agree. And you said melting pot. I mean, that's a great way to describe essentially what Skinwalker Ranch is. It's like a melting pot of high strangeness, a melting pot of bizarre and exotic incidents that occur. And some people would say it's melting pot of paranormal activity and incidents that happen out there. So yeah, that made me take note when they discovered that signal out behind Homestead 2, when there shouldn't have been anything out there. Definitely, definitely pretty worth making note of, right? Right on. So again, Jimm and Pete launched their drones, and Jimm has the LiDAR, where Pete's drone is a thermal imaging drone, and both drones fly over toward the east. And Travis and Dragon then, of course, do what they do best, which is launch a rocket, right? And so the rocket, the first rocket that they launch, appears to go straight up, but executes an S-like liftoff pattern as though it's purposely trying to avoid some unseen obstruction or object in the sky above the triangle. Pete then asks if the team has anybody on the ground over by the mesa where that UAP or that orb flew out of it. And Travis says that they do not have anybody over there to the best of his knowledge. Pete then tells them something that I think is really interesting, Roger. He says that his thermal imaging drone is showing something really warm on the ground near where that UAP or that orb flew out of the mesa. Now, the object sticks out like a sore thumb, and it's clearly much hotter than anything else surrounding it. And again, remember, folks, this is a thermal imaging drone that Pete is flying, not a LiDAR. The LiDAR is from Jim Royston's drone. So Travis asks Pete if it was appearing that hot before they launched the rocket. And Pete said it was not, so far as he was aware. Dragon and Travis then get in the Jeep and drive over to inspect this hot anomaly or this hot rock. And those of you that watched Jeff Freeman's fantastic J Free 906 podcast yesterday, you probably saw the new term that some of the insiders are using for Pete, his hot rock, or Pete is hot rock Pete Brown Socks. Right? Great nickname for Pete. And so as Travis and Dragon get out of the Jeep and they're making their way to this hot rock, Pete guides them to the object via his thermal drone in real time. And sure enough, when Travis and Dragon get there, it is a large rock, a humongous boulder, seemingly, Roger, just about what, 20 to 30 feet from the base of the mesa. So
Yeah.
it's really like right up there against the base of the mesa. And Travis says there's no geological reason, at least that he's aware of, that would emit heat like that and show up on a thermal scan. And the interesting thing to make note of, Roger, is that when Travis and Dragon walked up to the rock and they put their hands on it, there was no indication that it was, super hot, right?
Right. Yeah. And when they went back and they're also looking because there were other, rocks in the area that show up on not only the LiDAR there, but the thermal cameras, and they're significantly, as you would expect, cooler. It's night, right? And so, yeah, but again, I think this episode, instead of getting answers, we've got a lot more questions. So, what would cause that rock to show up hotter on a thermal imaging, scan than other things in the area? It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it is curious that it is near where we have documented UAP exiting, right? Entering the mesa in the East Field, going through and then exiting there out of the mesa. So I don't know. It's one of those things that make you go, hmm.
It makes me almost wonder if perhaps again getting taking the precognitive sentient non-human intelligence angle, if maybe whatever this thing is able to spoof the thermal imaging and make it look on Pete's monitor for this thermal imaging drone to make it look like that rock is just really hot, but in actuality, it's not. So you got to wonder if maybe even that's a possibility. Because, and the only reason I say that is because, so far as we know, when Dragon and Travis walked up to that rock and touched it, there was no indication that it was any hotter than you would expect it to be for what the ambient temperature was there in that location at the time. So I don't know. That's just a thought that just entered into my mind just a moment ago as you were talking about that. But yeah, and so from that point, Travis and Dragon they head back to the Triangle to launch another rocket. And aside from flying off at an angle instead of going straight up, nothing strange or unexpected appears to happen in the immediate moments after the launch. So then the team they decide to call it a night and tear everything down and end this massive laser experiment. The team meets up at the command center the following day to review the data. Travis then tells the team after they've collected into the command center that they have discovered something quote unquote really odd in the snapshots from the cameras that were surrounding the lasers. Eric, of course, then remarks, I can't explain this. The photo shows a void occurring in the upward pointing laser beams, and it appears, Roger, to cut off the beams, and then the beams resume skyward on the other side of where this void appears to be coming into frame.
which
And
is not
Roger,
possible.
this is not supposed to be possible with our current understanding of science and physics. I mean, for science minded people like you and I, this is a serious WTF moment, right?
Right. I mean, and the only thing that it just like when you have a light source, right, and you cut that off, it doesn't just automatically bend around and go, and then all of a sudden it has the same strength, right? The only thing that I could even imagine is where if you have some type of cloaking device and it takes that, right, and then that beam is redirected around, and then it, pushes on, but then again, like what good is a cloaking device if it's doing that? So whatever was making that, like, did something that I don't know if it was messing with them or if it was just saying like, hey, I can do some pretty crazy stuff here, and you got like again, like Dr. Taylor and Eric Bard, when they were looking at that, like they could not explain it. And what's even crazy is it's not like it was just this one-off picture. As they went through varying heights, you had the laser that was cut out. And clearly something was in there, in that space, blocking out that light. And yet it continued on the other side. So it's just, again, more questions than answers. I mean, it's exciting to see. It definitely lends, again, more credence to that there is something there, absolutely. What that thing is, how it works, is this something that is sentient? Is it manned by sentient beings? Is it a control center? Does it open up a wormhole? I mean, who knows at this point? But like literally seeing those pictures, I cannot explain that. That just doesn't that light doesn't work that way. You
Yeah,
can't bend light around.
exactly. And it instantly calls to mind the what happened when Caleb shined that green targeting laser up into the
Hmm.
triangle that one time, and it seemed to once it hit that spot where they discovered the blob, the beam appeared to cut off, and then again to continue on above where this seemingly, for want of a better term, cloaked object would have been, and then it bends it and splits the laser. And again, how is that possible? What causes light to do that? I mean, because we my understanding, I mean, I have a very limited understanding of the physics of light. Travis, on the other hand, is an optical physicist. One of the PhDs that he holds is as an optical physicist. And Travis was equally as stumped and absolutely astonished by what these still photos were showing as the rest of us were. Because
Right.
again, light isn't supposed to behave like that. And so what happens at that point is Travis makes an observation from these photos that the ends of the beams appear to be kind of rounded off. And Eric then mentions that this anomaly was caught on film more than once, and he proceeds to show a couple more still photos of this anomaly occurring where these beams are seemingly cut off and then, you know, continue to proceed. And a total of three long exposure photographs is where this anomaly is seen throughout at least three of these still photos. Travis mentions that it appears to be happening, oddly enough, only within the green lasers, because when the beams are solid blue or kind of purplish, the anomaly seemingly does not occur. Only within the spectrum of the green lasers does it appear to occur in this particular experiment. They all appear to be happening also at 100 feet off the ground. So there's another similarity that these three still photos appear to share. Eric says he really wants to try to repeat this experiment later, and Travis says he wants to figure out if there's any sort of connection to the voids appearing in the green lasers and the UAP, remember, that they saw before the experiment started earlier that evening. Dr. Taylor then says that the experiment was a success because they now have a very specific space to focus on in future experiments that will hopefully lead to some answers. And Thomas then chimes in and says they need to bring new salt laser back out to do this again, and everybody readily agrees. So Eric sums things up by saying, quote, "We've seen so many unusual things happen here above the triangle. It raises the question as to what could be operating there. What could be present in that space? Could it be related to something in the UFO or UAP demand? We can't dismiss it, and that's tantalizing." Close quote. Travis then ends by saying, quote, "We don't know yet how all the crazy phenomena we keep seeing and detecting out here at Skinwalker Ranch might be related to one another. But after what happened during this last experiment, I think we have a lot more evidence to suggest that the triangle and the mesa could be the keys to figuring it out." Close quote. And Roger, that essentially wraps up episode 6 of uh, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. And some pretty significant statements that are made there in the closing statements from both Eric and Travis. Specifically, how Eric says that they can't dismiss that what they saw with this laser anomaly may be something related to the UFO or UAP demand, that they can't dismiss it, and that he finds it tantalizing. And I think that's a pretty heavy statement that Eric says there. And then Travis emphasizing that again, the triangle and the mesa are the keys to figuring out what exactly this quote unquote secret to Skinwalker Ranch just might be. And what gets me, Roger, is we've seen on social media the last couple of days. There's been some Skinwalker Ranch insiders and other people that have said that this particular episode was kind of a bit of a disappointment and a letdown. And I don't get that at all. I don't see how anybody can. I don't think they watched the same episode that we did, Roger. I mean, how can you see what happened with these laser beams? and say that that's not fascinating or interesting or significant. I don't get it. Am I missing something?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm of the same mind. And again, I definitely respect people's opinion, and what they think of things. But I think, again, people need to level set their expectations and realize that, yes, I think the producers of this show are going to do their best to present it in what they feel the most entertaining way is, that we as viewers can digest that information. But at the end of the day, what this doesn't change is that it's a scientific investigation, right? And because of the scientific investigation, I think, and and this is where I think people will probably have a difference of opinion, and why some people may are saying like, oh, this one disappointed, is because they've run experiments like this before, right? And so it's like, well, we're not getting any more. We're not getting anywhere. What's happening? Why haven't we revealed some crazy alien threat? Why hasn't a portal opened? Why haven't we seen a spaceship come out? What's going on under the ranch? But the thing is that with the science and the experimentation, you have to repeat these things over and over again to get the same type of responses or even similar responses. And so, yeah, that's where I differ with people. This is exciting. Not only were they able to reproduce in the mesa something that is generating what could be a force field, we're also seeing like the PR GPS data still being scrambled and not making sense, and then bringing out even more high-powered lasers to where we think there's this blob anomaly, something that's cloaked in the sky, and we get more information where things happen that shouldn't, as we understand physics and reality. I mean, that just blows me away. And if you're not excited by that, I don't know what to tell you, right? Like, you're going to see some of the same experiments repeated over and over again, using different methods, bringing in heavier or more high-powered equipment. But that's what's getting us closer, right? We're seeing a level of detail that hasn't been seen before or shared with the general public, and that's what makes it exciting.
I agree. Well, you know who these people probably are, Roger. They're people that enjoy eating guacamole and avocados.
Yeah, I had a strong feeling that they probably do enjoy avocados and guacamole, and I would highly encourage anyone that is on that diet, you should probably eat something else, because you and I know guacamole on tacos or pretty much anything else just is not that appetizing, and can steer you in the wrong way when it comes to scientific experimentation.
Absolutely, it's an unpardonable sin. In all seriousness, though, folks, I found this episode to be every bit as fascinating as the previous five that we've seen so far in season five of the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. I think that focus is still there. I think the pace of discovery is sure seems to be picking up, and the excitement level for me is still at a very high level. And I get that some people have different expectations of how that pace is going. But again, as we've mentioned before, Roger, there's some people that have the expectation of having resolution to some of these experiments and some of these issues within the space of a 42 to 43-minute television episode. And the real world, and particularly the scientific method, the scientific process, just it doesn't happen that way. That's just not the way things work. And for the
Yeah.
people that still feel that way, for the people that feel that this is going too slow, and they're, oh look, they're launching another rocket. Well, duh, why wouldn't they launch a rocket? Because you go with what gets repeatable results. And they get some pretty consistent results every time they launch a rocket. So that's like one of the most ridiculous observations and points of contention that people make is about the rockets. Of course, they're going to launch rockets. Why wouldn't they? I get that people are like, okay, this is getting to be old hat. this is getting to be kind of, routine now. Well, again, folks, that's what science is. Science is about repeating things and trying to get those repeatable results so that you can falsify or verify a hypothesis. That's just the way science works. Don't yell at me about it. Don't take it out on the guys at Skinwalker Ranch. Don't take it out on Prometheus, the entertainment, the production company. It's just the way that the process has to play out. And like you said, Roger, Prometheus Entertainment, their name says it all. They're in the business to create an entertaining television show. But they are making an entertaining television show about a very real, very legitimate scientific investigation. So somewhere in between the two there is where you should find the happy medium. And I certainly have. But again, that's just me. And if people want to accuse me of being a fanboy, guilty as charged. Happy to accept that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we live in our modern times where it's just we freely expect things to happen quickly. If we want food, we can jump in our car, we can go pick it up at McDonald's couple blocks away, or we can DoorDash it. We can, do the Uber Eats. We live in a society where things just happen quickly. I want this now, and you get it. And unfortunately, that's just not how these type of things work. And so, if that's not for you, if you're not in it for the long haul, and you just want a real quick explanation and be like, oh wow, then I know another show that you would love, but I'm not going to mention it here. So
Wink,
uh,
wink, nudge, nudge. Right.
all joking aside, it's I do hope people kind of take a step back and look at that Skinwalker Ranch. This thing, unless something crazy happens and a portal does open up and you got interdimensional beings or aliens walking through or a Tyrannosaurus Rex, who knows, right? It's going to be, I mean, they're doing this for the long haul and it could be generations, right? I don't feel like this is something like we're just the tip of the iceberg here.
Yeah,
And we have so much more to understand and so much more to do. And the knowledge that we're getting, it comes, right? A little bit at a time. And I think we have to digest that and we all need to be patient. So I'm in it for the long haul.
me too. And I know that a lot of our viewers and a lot of our subscribers are as well. And I'm sure that those folks share our enthusiasm and share our excitement for what remains ahead of us in regards to upcoming episodes. And I for one, as I know a lot of other folks are, am really curious to see what that kind of like gelatinous substance that Dragon shows off. We've seen it in the previews before, and if I were a betting man, my money is on. I think that's Stephen Greenstreet's diaphragm that they discover inside the mesa. How it got there, who
Remains
knows?
to be
But
unseen, but I'll tell you
right,
what, Green Street will not talk about it.
I'm sure he will not.
Doesn't have a diaphragm anymore, so he can't.
Oh, Raj, I love you. You're awesome. You get my twisted sense of humor.
I do.
Apologies to any sensitivities that I may have offended. All meant in good natured humor, including
Good
to
fun, good fun.
right, exactly, including to the subject of my comedy. But anyhow, folks, that wraps up our recap of episode 6. So now, Roger, we get to dive into Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. And of course, the series Beyond Skinwalker Ranch aired last season, uh, around the same time that the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch was on, and so it is now the series has been renewed for a second season. And for this first episode, we got one pretty interesting, rather eventful first episode for the this second season. And Roger, before we dive into analyzing what happened in this episode of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, I just want to be very upfront with folks. Um, there are some obvious differences in the docu series The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch and the docuseries Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. For
Yes.
starters, they are both produced by different production companies. Once again, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch is done by a company called Prometheus Entertainment, while Beyond Skinwalker Ranch is brought to us by a production company called Rail Splitter. And so you're automatically, because you're talking about different production companies, different production styles, the overall visual presentation and kind of flavor of the show is going to be different right out of the gate, right? And so it is with Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. Some of the differences that folks should recognize immediately is that on The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, they never break that fourth wall, do they, Roger?
No, they do not.
And what that means for those that aren't familiar with that term is it means that the people like Dr. Taylor and Eric Bard, the team at Skinwalker Ranch, don't look at the camera and speak directly to their cameraman and the production crew that's there to film it, and then you also don't hear the production crew and the film crew, interacting directly with the team members. Well, that's not at all the case with Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, where they break the fourth wall relatively often. So you see the hosts of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, which again are journalist Paul Babin and former CIA agent or officer Andy Bustamante. So, right out of the gate, again, folks, you've got different production and different shooting styles, different methods of presentation, if you will, to the two different docuseries. The other thing that I would make note of is, again, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, you have Eric Bard, who is a very well seasoned and well educated scientific researcher. And then you have Dr. Travis Taylor, as well as other subject matter experts like Jim Royston and Sam DeRiso of Omnitech, Pete Kelsey of Vecto Labs, and all these other really well respected and credentialed uh, subject matter experts that come on the ranch. Whereas Paul Babin and Andy Bustamante, they are not scientists. Again, Paul is a veteran journalist, and Andy is a former CIA agent. As far as we know, neither one of them holds any kind of scientific degrees or PhDs or any kind of certificates, anything like that. So again, you're talking about whereas the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch is 100% scientific in its approach, Beyond Skinwalker Ranch dabbles a little bit more in the what I would call, Roger, the gray area. And this is just, again, folks, my personal opinion, my personal
Right.
viewpoint on the matter. I'm not saying I'm right or wrong. This is just my own personal observation and opinion of the differences between the two programs. So for me, I'm much more science and logic based, which I know, being a Raiders fan, that just, again, that's a mystery. That's an anomaly in and of itself to be logic and science based in what I like to see. But I also do like the speculation. I like the mythologies and the stories, the legends, and Beyond Skinwalker Ranch pays more attention to the latter. They do use science, and I'm not trying to make it sound like they don't use science in their investigations, because they do. And because of their association with Skinwalker Ranch, they're using a lot of the same subject matter experts. Like we've seen Pete Kelsey appear last season on Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. So, but whereas The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch tries not to dabble too much into the legends and mythologies of different localities, different sites, Beyond Skinwalker Ranch runs toward them and kind of seems to make that its focus. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is entirely up to you, the viewer. And for me, again, I'm entertained by it. I like it. I like to hear those myths and those legends, but it's a completely different approach, a completely different ball of wax, as they say. So just kind of wanted to get that out so that people understand where I'm coming from. Am I saying that I think Skinwalker Ranch, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, is a more credible program? I would say in some ways I may answer that question as yes, I do, but that's not to say that I completely dismiss everything presented on Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. And particularly with this first episode, Roger, where Paul and Andy are beginning the second season at Mount Wilson Ranch in Nevada, which they visited last season, but they are now visiting again and getting much further in their investigation of Mount Wilson. So, Roger, that's kind of how I want to lay the groundwork as we approach Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. Is that because they kind of take that angle of being more focusing on the extraordinary stories and myths and legends, I'm very interested in it, but I'm probably going to be a little more. I'm going to hold their feet to the fire a little bit more in regards to I want to see irrefutable data, repeatable data. I want to see how they dissect it, how they analyze it. I really want to make sure they're not trying to be theatrical or be sensationalistic in the way they present it. So as Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, as the season progresses, if I seem to get a little critical, that's what it's about, folks. It's not because I think that it's all a bunch of bullshit and nonsense. It's just that I'm going to hold Beyond Skinwalker Ranch to the same standard that I hold The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, which is I want to see the data. I want to see the scientific method playing out. Great that they have all these myths and legends and stories to drive them into these exciting areas, but show me the data. Show me why it's interesting other than being a nice ghost story or something of the sort. Roger, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I am definitely of the same mindset that you are, Jim. Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, I think, does a great job at drawing you in, and especially season one, they focused on a lot of different areas that had high strangeness, right? And have a past people understand. They know the mythology, and Andy and Paul are out there, really trying to use some of the methodology or equipment processes that have been put in place by um, Skinwalker Ranch to kind of show that there are other places that experience similar things that they've seen on Skinwalker Ranch. To your point, Jim, yes, I think that the difference in the production company and the difference in the way they film and just who Andy and Paul are as individuals, it's very different than what you have as a team. So the team at Skinwalker Ranch, right? They are there. They work together every day. The ranch doesn't move. These locations that Andy and Paul go to, almost every episode is a new place, a new location to look, right? So you're almost walking into ground zero every time into a new situation. And so I think the start of this season with Paul and Andy actually made me a little bit more excited this season because they are actually going back and revisiting a place that they had some experience with in season one. So Mount Wilson. And so yeah, I think what I would say to our viewers, and like you said, Jim, is that I'm going to hold Beyond Skinwalker Ranch to the same, this I guess the same ideals and standards that I review The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. And sometimes we'll have behind the scenes discussions about episodes, especially from season one all the way up till now. Um, I think The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch has done a great job at establishing their credibility, establishing the credibility of those who are on the ranch. Um, who is subject matter experts in what. You don't have one person claiming that they can do it all. It's a team, right? And The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch has a variety of resources and they can bring people together. And so naturally, it's going to be a different type of show and the way that they experiment and do that. Andy and Paul, they're more free form. They're going to go out, they're going to perform experiments, they're going to use some of the same technology that we've seen on Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, but they're again, you have to rely on what their expertise is, and it may not always be the expertise that we see on Secret Skinwalker Ranch. So knowing that, it's great that like kicking off season 2 here for Beyond is that they're going back to a place that actually has a real life connection to Skinwalker Ranch in that Robert Bigelow owned the Mount Wilson Ranch at the same time he owned Skinwalker Ranch, which I don't believe in coincidences is very interesting to me. And so let's jump into it. I really found this episode actually exciting because of what they were doing. And if you've seen season 1 when they visited the Mount Wilson Ranch, they got hit with a massive snowstorm that came out of nowhere, which doesn't surprise me, right? Because anytime you're dealing with things that can be related to Skinwalker Ranch, you never know what's going to get you. But they did find some great things there, and they went back out. And again, that goes back to the scientific method, right? They're going back out to see and document more evidence to back up what they had the first time.
Absolutely. Could not agree more. So, Roger, let's apply our cheap ass, no frills style of podcasting to season 2 of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. And big tip of the hat to our very dear friend, Jeff Freeman of the J Free 906 podcast, who, folks, if you'll recall, last year, Jeff did a absolutely splendid weekly recap of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch and was kind enough to invite me to be a co-host on most, if not all, of the recaps that he did for the first season of Skinwalker Ranch. So this season, we're kind of stepping in for Jeff, and Jeff is actually going to join us, Roger, on some of these recaps. In fact, coming up on June 28th, I believe, is when Jeff is going to try to join us for our recap around that time. So we will, you folks that are used to seeing Jeff recap this, stay tuned because Jeff will actually be venturing into the Soul of the Unexplained to help us recap some of these future episodes. But as you say, Roger, let's dive right in to Mount Wilson and the episode that is titled Skinwalker's Evil Twin, kind of like a part 1 kind of thing. So we start off with Paul Babin and Andy Bustamante meeting with Brandon Fugal, Travis Taylor, and Eric Bard at the command center on Skinwalker Ranch. Brandon starts the conversation by talking about the pair's visit last season to Mount Wilson Ranch, which is located in Nevada, not terribly far from Area 51. Brandon is clearly intrigued by the results of their previous visit and by the striking similarities between Skinwalker Ranch and Mount Wilson Ranch. Most notably, of course, the fact that both properties were owned by billionaire Bob Bigelow. During the course of their conversation with Brandon, as they recap what happened during their last visit in last season, Andy tells the assembled group that the harsh winter conditions that ultimately halted their investigation last time actually ended up yielding some unexpected benefits in the form of a massive sinkhole forming in one of the those mine shafts that they used the dynamite in, granting them what looks like easier access to further exploring. And there appears to be some kind of underground network of tunnels or passageways underneath Mount Wilson Ranch. And of course, Roger, the big legend is that there is an extraterrestrial spacecraft or UFO of some kind buried and or stored somewhere underground in one of those tunnels beneath Mount Wilson Ranch. So Andy and Paul then proceed to Mount Wilson Ranch, where they meet up with Carl Andreasen, or most of you on YouTube here will know him as Carl Crusher. Fantastic YouTube channel. Cannot recommend it highly enough. And Roger and I actually got to meet Carl during the very first Phenomenon, and it was kind of neat to get to shake hands with Carl. So they meet up with Carl and also with Mount Wilson Ranch owner Jeff McBurney. And Jeff tells the team that the winter melt off this past season is the most they've ever experienced on the mountain. Carl then tells them that, in his opinion, that blizzard that drove them off the mountain last season was very likely what ended up showing them the true way to get into those tunnels due to the resulting runoff and subsequent sinkhole that formed as a result of all that heavy snowfall. Now, just to give you an idea, folks, that sinkhole is approximately 40 feet wide and 60 feet long. So we're talking about a pretty good sized sinkhole. They then bring in mining expert Jerry Pankow, and he tells the team that the sinkhole and the debris contained in it look like no kind of mining activity he's ever seen before. He says that it seems more to him like it's an underground vault or a tunnel or cave system as opposed to a mining operation. Jerry then says that a big reason he believes this is because it's simply too big, Roger. It's big enough to put a vehicle in, big enough to drive a vehicle into and out of. Whereas, quite obviously, a mining shaft would be much smaller.
Right. Where you'd have people walking in, walking out versus something much bigger where, again, like a standard size vehicle, or even bigger vehicles than that such as the military would use.
Right. Exactly. And Jerry then points to the discovery of a low ground pressure mat, which the military uses when rubber tire vehicles they drive them onto a soft beach for a beach landing to give the tires purchase or traction. So these are kind of like traction mats. And he says there's no reason he can think of for these traction mats to be out in the middle of the Nevada desert because there is no soft ground at Mount Wilson Ranch. However, Jerry then says that if you were to dig deep enough into the ground to where you were below the water table, the ground would get mushy and soft. And if you needed to drive big vehicles underground, you would absolutely need one of those pressure traction mats to do so in order to keep the vehicles from getting bogged down in the sand and or the mud. So Andy then points out a huge chain drive or seeming like a pulley system in that sinkhole, and Jerry believes it's likely for some kind of large gate or a motorized heavy gate. And Paul and Andy then agree to bring the Terra Exploration Group back out to Mount Wilson Ranch to do an underground survey. And again, the Terra Exploration Group were the imaging team that they brought out last season at Mount Wilson Ranch, where if you recall that drone was like it was running into, they said, some kind of invisible force field and caused the drone to crash. So
I just have to say this that I feel honestly really bad for that company because they they know what they're doing and they have lost a lot of equipment in trying to help get to the bottom of Mount Wilson there. So anytime I see technology that just doesn't function right, has high strangeness, and those drones are not cheap, and so my heart goes out to them literally when I see that because that's you invest a lot into a business, and those things are your babies. So
absolutely. And how many times have we heard Pete Kelsey tell us about the drones that he's used on Skinwalker Ranch that have, encountered some kind of interference and just outright crashed. And I mean,
crashed.
these are
They're gone.
drones that
Yeah.
cost several tens of thousands of dollars, if not more. So yeah, this technology is not something that you buy in your local hobby store kind of type
Right?
thing.
You're not ordering these drones off Amazon and putting them up. So
But maybe they bought them off eBay.
I mean, that's a debate for another day, Jim.
Yes, it is. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So again, Terra Exploration Group sets up a new magnetometer drone to fly a grid pattern using GPS coordinates to do a survey of the underground area where the tunnel or passageway in the sinkhole is. And this new drone, we should mention, is shielded, so it should be more resilient and less likely to experience some kind of electromagnetic interference causing it to crash, unlike the previous drone that they had out there last season. After the survey is complete, the Terra group go off to render and analyze the data as Paul and Andy prepare to turn in for the night. And Roger, this is where the episode took a turn that I was not expecting. So Jeff McBurney, the owner of the ranch, and Carl Andreasen meet Paul and Andy at their room and tell them a rather ominous story about the significance of the room that they will be staying in that night. Jeff proceeds to tell Paul and Andy that years ago, when Bigelow owned the property, he was staying in the same exact room and had an encounter with what Robert Bigelow called a shaman or a shaman. And Carl then explains that Bigelow, while he was asleep in the bed, woke up to the presence of a very tall figure that was so tall it had to stoop over to avoid hitting the ceiling. This figure then told Bigelow to leave. And while Bigelow didn't leave, as far as we know, from what we understand from eyewitness accounts that saw Bob Bigelow the following day, he was clearly very shaken up by this experience of this shaman figure appearing in his room. Paul then suggests that they set up cameras in the room to see if they capture anything strange or unusual. Andy, of course, agrees and affirms that they're not going to leave the room, despite the freaky Bigelow experience told to them by both Jeff and Carl. One of the cameras they set up in the room is an HD FLIR thermal camera, very new, modern, and up to date. And of course, this camera is designed to capture heat signatures from objects that the camera is pointed toward. And wouldn't you know it, Roger, as soon as the cameras are set up, Paul witnesses something odd on that FLIR camera that he had literally just turned on. And he calls Andy over to see it. Paul's thermal FLIR camera allegedly captures the image of a shadowy, human like form situated in the corner of the room opposite from where Paul is standing. And Andy arrives in time to see it on Paul's FLIR camera. The figure then apparently moves. Now, because Paul had just barely turned on the camera, it was not recording. However, as luck would have it, the production team, the film crew, did have a camera running and caught just a brief glimpse of what was seen on Paul's FLIR camera as the production crew's cameraman was kind of peering over Andy and Paul's shoulder. Now, Roger, I got to tell you, this is compelling and interesting, but I don't necessarily feel like saying it's conclusive of what they think they captured on this FLIR camera. Was it a shadow being? Was it a disembodied spirit or an interdimensional entity of some kind? Or was it perhaps merely just an artifact of the digital imagery as that camera was in the process of booting up and turning on? And I don't know if the right term is priming. So I don't know, Roger. What for me it was a bit dramatic for my liking and interesting for sure, but difficult for me to readily accept at face value as it was presented on screen. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, and having seen Ghost myself, I can certainly understand Paul being startled, in the fact that he's looking into a corner, right? Turning on the FLIR camera and seeing something that his own eyes did not see there. And I guess that's where it's difficult when you don't have it fully on camera, and then um, the production camera before Andy kind of covers it up, you do get that a couple frames there where it does appear that there's um, some type of potentially shadow type, and I'm going to say something, because there's a lot of the things that in my research of paranormal, things that happen when you're looking through images like that, or pictures that people take, and you see something otherworldly. A lot of times our minds try to make sense of what is there. And so I think believe it's called matrixing, and it's going to your mind's going to build a pattern around what it sees and create something that's the most understandable to you as that individual. So, and even sometimes, and I think this happens a little bit in The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, where they're describing something that they're seeing, but then the production company then will go in and actually circle something and like, oh, this is where you need to look, which they did here, and they, traced what is the outline of an individual. Now, can we say conclusively that that was an individual, or is this just something that, you know, it looks familiar to us because it has a humanoid shape, and so it's easy to assume that, oh
Exactly.
yeah, this is. They had already talked about the story. There was this big tall shadow being. It scared Bob Bigelow, and right, and then this happened. So I think that I definitely think, at least for me, they did capture something. What that something was, I I don't know. And to you, and to your point, I'm not experienced enough with a FLIR camera to say what I'm going to see when I first flip it on, before it's calibrated, before it's set up and taking pictures. And so I will say that yes, I found it exciting for what they saw, because I do believe that you can see, and I've seen past recordings for different things where a thermal camera will pick up what you can't see with your naked eye. And so it was exciting to see that, and I can see what maybe startled Andy and Paul and created the excitement. But to really kind of try to pull it together and say, well, this is definitely correlated because it was Bob Bigelow's, like, again, we're going off of a ghost story, what people said, right? It's hearsay. We don't know if that actually happened. You know, I certainly have never seen anything where Bob Bigelow has come out and said, yes, this is what's happened and whatnot. Is it a cool find? Absolutely, because I've seen things on FLIR cameras that definitely I'm like, that's interesting, and that's definitely, at least in my opinion, otherworldly. But I can't discount, like you said, could it be something that automatically showed up just because the camera was turning on, or the angle that they had it at just quickly showed something like that, and then because they moved it or whatever, it went away. And when they tried to recreate it and they went over, obviously the camera was on and it was working. So we could see that it was functioning correctly after. But unfortunately, they weren't able to recreate it or show us that, if you start talking about scary stuff, or they left the room, leave it running, right, that an apparition actually appeared or something else was anomalous in that photo.
No, you touched on everything just perfectly, Roger. It there's definitely something that was captured on film, and yes, I absolutely see that there appears to be a human-like figure uh, with a head. Um, and interesting of note, Roger, was that where the face would be was completely black. In other words, there was like really cold temperature where that face, if it was in fact some kind of human-like um, apparition or interdimensional being, what have you. So for me, it's not so much a case of that there was something captured on film. For me, it's just a matter of how do we have really any idea of knowing that it really is what it appears to be at first glance. And that's one thing that, again, that's me holding it to a higher standard than what you would see on so many of these, ghost hunting, ghost adventure kind of type shows where, you know, you just know that they're playing to the camera and they're playing up to dramatize and sensationalize. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily what Paul and Andy are doing here, because they clearly, there's something that shows up on that screen. And what they then do, Roger, is that the incident spurs Paul and Andy to contact the Skinwalker Ranch team immediately to tell them what they experienced. So they then get on a video conference call with Brandon Fugel, Travis Taylor, and Eric, and give them the backstory of it being Bigelow's room and how Bigelow had the visitation from the shaman or the shaman. And Andy tells Eric uh, that this is what made Bigelow leave the property in a hurry. And that's one of the things that kind of caught my attention, Roger, was Andy telling Eric that that was what made Bigelow leave the property in a hurry. Do we really know that, though?
We don't. We
I
don't.
mean, is that what made Bigelow jump ship? Uh, I don't know. That sounds to me like he's jumping to conclusions because, as you said a moment ago, Roger, Bigelow has never come forward and said really anything about Mount Wilson Ranch. And the few things that he said about Skinwalker Ranch, um, we know that he's had encounters with uh, what we would call the hitchhiker phenomena. We know that it made his life a living hell, the hitchhiker effect that he and his wife dealt with. But as far as that being the reason why Bigelow decided to leave the property in a hurry, um, for me, that seems on the surface to be too much of a leap to be jumping to that kind
Right.
of conclusion. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. And I put myself in trying to put myself in the shoes of Bob Bigelow, right? Conducting research and experiments and things like that. And, just based on my own experience, if I suspected or I was getting close to knowing that maybe there was something buried underground and could potentially be otherworldly technology, something like that, I'm sorry, a shadow person or something hovering over my bed telling me to leave is not going to make me leave. My my devotion to science and what's out there would actually take over. So unless something completely otherworldly picked me up and physically threw me and barred me from entering, some said cavern or whatnot, just my own opinion, like I think it is kind of a jump. I think Bob Bigelow is the man that would be like if it really happened, if there was a spirit that appeared or something like that, and it did shake him up, I think he would talk to the people about it. But I don't think he's the type of person that would just run away and be like, nope, selling the ranch, it's done. So I think that there's just too much at stake, and it was kind of a quick jump to conclusion without really trying to get more facts or doing more research about when did he actually leave, when did this actually occur. I'd have to see more of, I guess, investigative work being done.
Yeah, and I also have to admit the fact that there's a possibility that maybe Andy knows more about the backstory than we do. That's
True.
absolutely within play. That's absolutely a possibility. But because we don't know, because we've never heard anything directly from Bob Bigelow to support that statement that Andy made, just it makes the claim a little dubious to me is
True.
all. So Eric then asks them to confirm that they had instruments in the room to take readings and measurements. And Andy says that they did. Yet the only instrument we know for sure that they were using at that time was a FLIR camera. And that wasn't even recording at the time. So, Roger, we don't know about there being any tri-field meters that they were using in that room, spectrometers, dosimeters, what have you. The only thing that we know that they were using as equipment as that incident unfolded was the FLIR camera. So again, something else that to me doesn't completely stack up with, and I don't want to make it sound like I'm attacking Andy. It's just again the way it's presented. Eric, because Eric is who Eric is, wants to make sure that all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed in the scientific investigation process. And so, of course, he's going to ask Andy, did you have instruments that were taking readings and measurements? And for Andy to say yes, maybe there were. Again, we don't know from the way it was presented on the episode, because the only equipment that we saw operating at the time were the production crew's film camera, obviously, and the FLIR camera that Paul had just booted up. We didn't see any active tri-field meter use going on, or spectrometer, or anything of the sort. So again, that was
And
another thing that kind of caught my attention, Roger.
yeah, and quite often what they do in the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch is give, the viewers, us, even baseline readings saying like this is what in science, like at this is what it should be, right? And so even a tri-field meter or an EMF detector, just to get baseline information, right? Like what was the ambient temperature of the room? And had
Correct.
people been there before? Are there magnetic fields around that could be potentially affecting it, right? Really trying to give that background and, even having that and saying like, wow, how do we try to recreate this? How do we go about it, right? I mean, for me, I would be all about like, hey, we're going to be sleeping here tonight, and let's go ahead and let's get not only the thermal camera set up and recording throughout the night, but we're also going to set up infrared cameras, and we're going to have things that, some of these other sensors going so that in the morning we can go back and review the data. Did something happen when we weren't there or we were asleep? That would lend more credence to making that kind of a statement saying, yes, we had instrumentation and we were recording. Unfortunately, it only showed itself once versus like, oh no, we had all this equipment or, we had instruments there. But if you're saying that we had instruments and it was actually only just the FLIR camera that had just barely turned on, then it's
Kind of
it's
shoots
kind of bad
themselves in
on
the
their
foot.
part, right? Because it's
Yeah.
not, and to me, and again, to the viewers out there and our listeners, when Eric and Travis were talking about this, Travis in particular seemed, when they were talking about it, just a little bit perplexed. He was like, okay, I can see, but he wasn't fully, I don't feel like he was fully bought on the idea of what they had seen. And, he challenged it a little bit and didn't seem to be like, okay, it's like, this is interesting, but it's not as like, oh, this is crazy. This is really cool, right? They wanted more information, and I don't think Andy and Paul were able to give them that information.
Absolutely. And Travis and Eric, if you recall, after viewing the footage, do mention that the cold spot in the corner does seem consistent. And Travis says he thinks he can make out the outline of the body and the head, and he thinks that it's interesting. So where it takes another turn that kind of caught me off guard here, Roger, is the narrator then takes us back to season 4 of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, when Jay Stratton comes to the ranch and tells the story of his shadow being encounter during one of his visits to the ranch during the Bigelow era. Now, Jay talks about how he and his team on Skinwalker Ranch at the time encountered those cold spots that we talked about in the atmosphere surrounding Homestead 2, and had that paralyzing fear that overcame them. And that at one point through a night vision scope, Jay saw a dark shadow like figure on what would be the second level of Homestead 2, although the second level of Homestead 2 was never completed, but still it was up where that second level would be. So, Roger, my question is, I wonder if Jay knew that they were going to run that little piece of him and his experience. And the reason I say that is, while there seem to be some fundamental similarities between Paul and Andy's encounter, mainly a shadow-like figure and appearing when viewed through thermal imaging, or in Jay's case, a night scope, that the encounter many years ago, that I'm not sure they're entirely the same. And so it kind of makes me wonder if they consulted with Jay ahead of time in using that footage from the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, because it seemed kind of not necessarily random. I'm not sure if I'm articulating this point as well as I'd like to, but um, it just seems. I mean, there are some similarities, but it also was quite a different circumstance. Jay's experience versus what Paul and Andy experienced, and
Yeah,
I don't know.
I 100% agree. And I think what it comes down to for me is it's not an apples to apples comparison. Um, you know, there are similarities, 100% there's similarities, but that's kind of where, when you draw the line on the similarities, what is more different? Like there are more things different between the two places and the experiences happening there than there are that is similar. And the things that are similar on a high level. Was there high strangeness? Yes. Did you see, is there a backstory to the place? Yes. Was something observed through a telescopic or some type of visual device? Yes. Right. But when you say, okay, right, like I think that was the way of the show trying to connect again, saying like, oh, things that happen on Skinwalker Ranch are happening here on Mount Wilson. And I'm not saying that they're not, but the depth and the level and the scope of trying to compare Jay Stratton's experience to Paul and Andy's experience, it's completely different. That you can't, at least in my opinion, in good conscience, say this is an apples to apples comparison.
Yeah,
It's it's not, right? There are completely different things, and I think at the end of the day, it wouldn't surprise me in the least if, you know, the show just added that in there for dramatic effect and that Jay probably wasn't consulted. I don't know that for sure, but it just seems to me that that would be added in there to try to
yeah,
lend credence to the fact that, again, like things happen. And this is where I'm going to be kind of, both. You and I have talked about this, and I'm just going to come out and say it, but you don't need to dramatize the things that happen. There are things that happen out of the ranch, and again, things that happen out at Mount Wilson that are truly strange, things that are unexplainable. And I don't think you need to pull in all this extra stuff to say, oh my gosh, we've got the same stuff going on. No, the stuff that happens will speak for itself. The high strangeness will speak for itself. You don't have to ham it up. You don't have to add more drama to it. You don't have to pull in, unless there is really, really like, if Jay Stratton had gone out and he had been to Mount Wilson and had talked to Andy and talked to Paul and explained his experience before, right? And had the same experience or a similar experience, then I could see pulling that in to connect the two. But the way it happened in the show, like it doesn't make sense for the show to do that. It kind of takes the thing that they saw and found. It kind of makes it to me less exciting, right?
yeah,
I want Mount Wilson to stand on its own legs. I definitely think a lot of things in this world supernaturally are connected 100%, right? But you don't need to make a stretch, or you don't need to bring in something and present it as this, oh, this is connected because somebody had this experience, right? Like you and I, we could have very similar experiences in different cities, but that doesn't mean that your experience was the exact same thing. And I should bring it out and tell people that because Jimm had this and this happened to him, that it's exactly why this happened to me.
hmm,
Causation is not correlation, vice versa, things like that. But yeah, it's unfortunate that they did that because I think that there's enough going on at Mount Wilson to justify its own. It'll stand on its own two legs. There is high strangeness going on there. So no need to come back and try to pull in, some of the past of Skinwalker Ranch just to lend credence to it or to make it seem more plausible.
yeah. And again, in the interest of full disclosure, folks, for all we know, Jay Stratton did give them the approval to include that clip of his encounter from the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. I'm not trying to imply that I know one way or the other, because I don't. But it just seemed really random and unnecessary of a detour to go there because like you said, Roger, it the strangeness that happens at both Skinwalker Ranch and at Mount Wilson should be enough to stand on their own merits, and for me it does. So I do understand the need to draw a parallel between the similarities, and at least on the surface, I get why the production company and the folks that edit this episode, I can understand why they would do it because it is relevant, I suppose, but still, it kind of caught me off guard. I was not expecting Jay Stratton to be tied into Mount Wilson Ranch because I've never, you know, obviously I'm not aware of Jay being connected with Mount Wilson Ranch in any way, shape, or form prior to in any of the capacities that he served in while he was visiting Skinwalker Ranch. So just again, folks, my personal, admittedly biased speculation and opinion. So take it or leave it. Um, but
You're a
that's
Raiders fan.
just
I knew it. This is
it,
why.
it is. But and again, folks, don't get the impression that I did not enjoy this episode. I enjoyed it immensely. So the show then returns to Mount Wilson Ranch, and Paul and Andy meeting up with the Terra Exploration Group at the sinkhole, which is located just above the lower mesa, the lower meadow, excuse me, to review the recent aerial magnetometer survey results. And Roger, this is where things get really interesting. So Terra Exploration Group's data shows the first image, which demonstrates the presence of a large void or tunnel in or beneath the sinkhole. And also present in this photo are three distinct black lines, which are indicative, again, presumably, of voids or tunnels that shoot off in multiple directions. So Robert Leonard of the Terra Exploration Group then overlays a Google Earth image over this image that we're talking about to show how well it fits with both what they feel and what they've been told about there being an underground complex of tunnels and passageway. It all seemingly fits. And so Robert Leonard then shows that the trajectory of one of those lines, or tunnels slash voids, lines up perfectly with both the upper area's presumed point of entry and the lower meadow. It like perfectly lines up. And so Robert Leonard then suggests that perhaps the tunnel was built to provide access under the meadow to hide the spaceship under the ground as it is rumored to be there. So the lower meadow is described as being a marshy area located next to a creek. And when Bigelow's team tried to dig there with a large bulldozer, the machine got bogged down in the mud clear up to the driver's seat of the bulldozer and got stuck there for a long time. And Andy then states that he feels that this is an intentional infrastructure built by human beings to provide the fastest way to get underground in the lower meadow. The Terra Exploration Group then suggests the best way to find out is, of course, to dig. And so Jeff McBurney and the others agree that the next step should be to dig their way into that tunnel underneath the sinkhole. Once again, Jerry Pankow comes in with a backhoe and begins excavating the sinkhole site. He encounters all manner of junk, Roger, from more of those vehicle traction mats to twisted bits of steel, and there's like the engine of an old car or truck, the frame of an old pickup truck, an axle, and even the remnants of what appears to be an old tractor or farm equipment, maybe a combine of some kind. Just a big, huge junk pile, for want of a better term, inside the sinkhole. And it looks like it was all shoved in there in a hurry. And why would they take all the time and energy to bury all this stuff in the manner in which it was buried? I mean, That's a very valid question, right? So, as predicted by Terra Exploration Group's magnetometer survey, the backhoe seems to uncover proof of there being an entryway into an underground void or tunnel. So Andy then meets up with the Terra group at the lower meadow to conduct another magnetometer aerial survey of the lower meadow. Now, we should mention the last time, again, that they tried doing an aerial magnetometer survey of the lower meadow. Remember, Roger, that drone malfunctioned and crashed, and they ended up having to complete the survey on foot, which was, I'm sure, quite an inconvenience. And as the drone takes off, and this is one of the really extraordinary things that happens on screen in this episode, Roger, is as that drone takes off with the magnetometer, um, on that big long cable underneath it, it abruptly crashes to the ground after reaching a height of seemingly only 8 to 10, maybe 12 feet. And it
It just
appears,
came crashing.
yeah, it appears as though it has been yanked or smacked out of the air by some unseen force, right? It's like it goes up and then just bam, like violently. It's almost like something grabbed that magnetometer cable and just yanked it out of the sky. Um, and that was pretty interesting to see happen. And the drone, remember, folks, was insulated and shielded, so it should have been protected from any electromagnetic interference. Yet it still crashed, and it crashed hard. And Andy says it's almost like there's an invisible, impenetrable energy barrier around the lower meadow that interferes with and fries electronics, like it doesn't want readings to be taken of the ground. So, Roger, what's your assessment of that with the drone going up and then just violently crashing to the ground?
Yeah, I could tell everybody that witnessed that were genuinely surprised at that happening, right? And it was yeah, so, and this is where, I kind of say again, coming back to like this is the stuff that excites me about this episode. Because genuinely we know because we've seen it in episodes of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch where the ranch messes with electronics and equipment and things like that. And this, especially with what's rumored being there on Mount Wilson, um, it doesn't surprise me that they've continued to run into some roadblocks. And while I hated seeing that drone drop from the sky just after it goes up, it does give you more evidence that there is something there that interferes with electronics and something that appears to be, again, this is speculation, but trying to prevent readings from being taken. Um, they're using at least that type of drone technology. I know in the last season they walked it so they can get their magnetometer readings, but really, really curious that that happened again. And I think that just lends more credence to some of the theories there that, especially with what they were digging up and how that tunnel system has been multiple or has been verified multiple times going down into that meadow with what they were pulling out of the sinkhole and with what was going on, with that drone dropping out of the sky. There is something to that. And that's what is really exciting because, you know, I mean, if there was some type of technology down there that they were using, um, right, to prevent things like that, like that's pretty high tech stuff. And to me, again, I just it's those type of things that they're showing on this episode that make me excited, right? Because now you're starting to see some repeatability and coming out and like now what can we verify based on this? We know we have a magnetic anomaly. We know that something's interfering with the drone equipment. And, last year, that drone, or the last season, the drone went crazy. And this one just dropped right out of the sky. So definitely, they're on the right track of finding something.
I would agree, and like we said, as you so eloquently put it, this appears to be one of those repeatable results that is crucial for them to be able to be documenting. So, unfortunate that this, surely expensive drone was had to be sacrificed for the cause, as they say. But it's a repeatable result, right? So,
Right.
in the process of digging at the collapsed area, Carl comes across a piece of garbage, an outer wrapping for building insulation, with the date of 2005 on the wrapper. Now, Jeff McBurney bought Mount Wilson Ranch from Bigelow in 2007. So the significance of this wrapper and presumably the other items dug out during the excavation was that they were likely buried there sometime between 2005 and 2006 before Jeff McBurney purchased the ranch in 2007. So rather interesting kind of a time capsule type of find with this, wrapper that they found that had the date on it. And it appears that Bigelow had a large operation going on as late as 2005 or 2006. And worth noting, Rogers, that for some reason, he buried all of this equipment and completely sealed it and closed off the entryway to the tunnel to hide any evidence of there being an operation like that or of there being underground passageways or tunnels. So that's pretty significant observation to make here. Now, again, folks, for those of you that don't know, Bigelow owned both Skinwalker Ranch and Mount Wilson Ranch at the same time. However, he did sell Mount Wilson Ranch in 2007. He did not sell Skinwalker Ranch until 2016 was when Brandon Fugel took possession of the ranch. Now, we still don't know what the results of any of Bigelow's research and or investigations yielded. Some of the information is still classified due to the involvement of the U.S. government. And as I've mentioned elsewhere on the Sol of the Unexplained, as difficult as it is for some folks to swallow, Bob Bigelow owned the property. So if he doesn't want to share the data and the information, he's under no legal, ethical, or moral obligation to do so.
Right.
And I realize that rubs a lot of people the wrong way, and I can certainly understand the frustration. But again, he was the lawful owner of the property, and he has a right to keep that close to his chest if he wants to, and indeed he has. So, not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just simply saying them's the breaks, whether you like them or not. Once again, Andy and the Terra Exploration Group do a magnetometer survey by foot in the lower meadow area using a device that sends electromagnetic frequencies into the ground to measure the conductivity of objects below, such as metals. And of course, they're doing this because the drone rather dramatically crashed on them. So they begin by measuring at 50 feet deep into the ground and then proceed on to eventually as deep as 200 feet. Higher readings on their meter indicate the presence of a large metal object. So after covering the bulk of the lower meadow, testing at a depth of 50 feet, they detect no anomalous readings at the 50-foot depth. They then decide to move on to the 100-foot depth. Roger, the first reading at 100 feet pegs the meter. I mean, that meter just goes
All the way to
hard,
the edge.
hard right. And so 10 feet further away from the initial 100-foot depth test, they get the same result. The meter pegs hard right. And Andy suggests that whatever the large, presumably metallic object being detected at that 100-foot depth could be some kind of unknown secret equipment or device from the US government, or, Andy says, something of an off world origin. Again, maybe a little too far of a leap with the latter there than I would have made, but you don't know. I mean, is it a possibility? Sure. So to that end, can't necessarily fault him for suggesting that it may be something truly exotic. So the Terra Exploration Group team then try a survey at the 200-foot depth. And once again, Roger, that meter pegs hard
Wow.
right at 200 feet. So whatever is buried in the lower meadow is very large, as it covers over 100 feet of depth, right? The 100 foot to 200 foot at least. And so, I mean, wow, right? I mean, what could it be, and why is it buried so deep? Those are what we want to know. And that's basically where the episode ends. But worth noting, Roger, is the preview for the next week's episode, which is a continuation of their investigation of Mount Wilson Ranch. And I don't know if you got to watch that preview, Roger, but it shows some pretty interesting stuff, beginning with what they call a manta ray looking object or craft of some kind, with the team asking, was this manta ray craft manufactured on site there at Mount Wilson Ranch, or was it discovered or recovered at Mount Wilson Ranch? We don't know. And so they appear to be bringing in also some kind of drilling rig, presumably to get further down into one of the tunnels. And they appear to come into possession of what they call ancient Bigelow technology that, to me, Roger, looks like an old projection TV of some kind, right? With the red,
Very
blue,
similar.
and green lamps, right? And Travis, we then see a segment of Travis then mentioning that perhaps Andy and Paul are attracting the attention of some shadow government group or an organization of oligarchs, and they should be careful not to piss them off. And we're then told that part two of their Mount Wilson research premieres next Tuesday on June 11th on the History Channel. So, a lot to unpack in that first episode, Roger. And as we said, it was a pretty impressive episode overall. Um,
Yeah.
I'll go so far as to say I think it's the best episode yet that we've seen of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, despite my criticisms that I did make uh, during our analysis of this. I thought it was an interesting episode, and I don't know about you, Roger, but I'm left with the distinct impression that there really is something underneath Mount Wilson Ranch. And we've heard the myths and the legends of there being a UFO, presumably an off world extraterrestrial or interdimensional craft of some kind that has been either buried or stored underneath Mount Wilson Ranch. And what that story reminds me of, Roger, is if you recall, a couple years ago, Bob Lazar appeared on Joe Rogan's podcast and talked about how the flying saucers that he worked on when he was working at S4 at Area 51, he mentioned that at least one of the flying saucer craft that he worked on was discovered in an archaeological dig. Do you remember that?
I do remember that. Yep.
So now, obviously, that jumps right from the screen of the old X Files TV show where Scully unearths this, long ago buried spacecraft off the coast of Africa, uh, part of the bigger mythological story arc in the X Files. I think it happened in the sixth or seventh season, beginning or end of that, but I digress. But still, um, there's this notion that at least some of these flying saucers, if they do exist, if they have in fact been recovered by the US government, that they were discovered as a result of an archaeological dig. In other words, they were already in situ, if you will, where they were discovered, presumably placed there by whatever civilization, whether it be Earth based or interplanetary or interdimensional, that would have placed them there in the areas where they were discovered. So, very fascinating story, Roger, that makes me wonder, is there in fact something that's there under Mount Wilson Ranch? Or is the reason why Bigelow sold the property and left in a hurry because his team got their hands on it?
Yeah, yeah, and that's the see, and it's funny because a lot of people um on the different Skinwalker channels on social media, a lot of people have brought up it's like if Bigelow was sitting on something that was so extraordinary, why would he sell the properties? And very valid question, right? And while we don't know specifically because he's never divulged that, um, his I guess his emergence into aerospace engineering makes me think that quite potentially what you talked about, that whether it's through craft retrieval, um, study, right, that he knows something a lot more than we'll probably find out. But I think it's a plausible idea that he did find something and covered it up and then sold it to somebody and thought that no one's ever going to dig here, no one's ever going to know about this stuff. Um, right? And so it could be very similar to what's on Skinwalker Ranch. Although, again, my opinion only on Skinwalker Ranch, I have a feeling just based on like what Colin Kelleher had described to George Knapp and things like that, that when they first started investigating, they were getting a lot of stuff, but after that, it really, really died down. And I'm wondering if Bigelow just gave up at that point and figured, well, nothing more is happening. I'm not getting any further than what I've been, you know, or what he's uncovered and been able to review. And so he made the decision to sell the ranch. And now the ranch is reacting in a different way with a new owner, and allowing things to happen. Because if you do believe that there is a sentient being that has precognition, um, and everything, then they obviously know what's going to happen and are in charge of everything that happens on that ranch. So again, a lot of speculation and theories, but exciting for sure.
Yeah, and it really does it does, make you wonder, what exactly is there a connection between some of Bob Lazar's allegations and some of his story versus what is allegedly here underneath Mount Wilson? And is there a connection? We don't know why Bob Bigelow sold Mount Wilson Ranch. We don't know why they bulldozed all of that equipment into that passageway and then sealed it up and covered it up to make it look like there was nothing ever there. I mean, let's be honest. Why would you do that? Why would you try to make it look like there was nothing there? Why would you completely try to cover up any evidence of there being a passageway going underneath the ranch? Um, it's suspicious at the very least.
Right.
Um, so we don't know. It's pure speculation as to the why. Why did Bigelow sell Mount Wilson, and what drew him there in the first place? Now, obviously, again, we can't understate the potential significance of Mount Wilson's ranch proximity to Area 51 and Groom Lake, right? So is there a connection there? Was what happened at Mount Wilson Ranch, was the government involved to a greater extent than we realized? Did the government own the property before Bob Bigelow did? These are all questions I don't know the answer to. Maybe somebody out there does, but I don't. I'm not as up to speed on Mount Wilson as I would like to be. But for those of you that would like to be more up to speed on Mount Wilson, highly recommend, again, Carl Crusher's YouTube channel. Carl has been doing an absolutely phenomenal series of YouTube videos on his YouTube channel from Mount Wilson Ranch, giving you more details of behind the scenes stuff and his own personal investigations out there. And I believe even Chris Bartell has joined him a couple of times out there to do some of the investigations. And of course, Roger and I, we think the world of Chris Bartell. And so, folks, please check out Carl Crusher's YouTube channel to learn more about this fascinating research that is going on at Mount Wilson Ranch. And again, tune in if you were drawn into this episode like Roger and I were. Make sure you tune in for the conclusion next week on the History Channel when part 2 of the Mount Wilson research and investigation airs next week on June 11th. So, Roger, we have been at this for 2 hours now. And again, folks, we're sorry we went so long on this one, but because of the schedules between Roger and I, we had to combine both the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch recap and the Beyond Skinwalker Ranch into one massive, gigantic podcast episode. This is not going to be the norm for either one. I mean, look, Roger, we wrapped up our Skinwalker Ranch recap in the space of about an hour, which I think is a record for us. But so yeah, thank you for bearing with us, folks. Thank you for subscribing. Massive shout of love and appreciation to all of our subscribers and to all the wonderful folks that have left comments for us on our previous videos, our previous podcasts. And again, to all the folks out there that are like Roger and I that love cilantro, thank you for voicing your support and being one of us that loves cilantro on their tacos and their Mexican food. It should be a given, right, Raj?
Exactly.
It's always a pleasure and a privilege to do these episodes with you, Roger. I'm excited to do our recaps next week. Again, folks, they will be split up into 2 different episodes where we recap both the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch and Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. And we will be bringing on some guests to join us potentially next week when we recap Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, as well as some upcoming roundtable podcast discussions about all kinds of things. We'll have some more Skinwalker Ranch insiders on to talk about the wonderful Skinwalker Ranch Insider Program. And again, there's no shortage of news coming up seemingly every week in the topic of UFOs and UAPs, which Roger and I will also touch upon in some of these future podcast episodes. So, Roger, any closing thoughts or remarks from you?
Yeah, I thank you again for viewing this video. If you like what you see, be sure and hit the subscribe button so you can get notifications when we have new and updated content. And again, thank you for listening and thank you for sharing your opinions. Just as Jim and I, we love Skinwalker Ranch. We love the high strangeness. Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, we love talking about this, and we invite your feedback. And I do hope that everyone has a wonderful week. And I look forward to talking with you, Jim, more and talking with our subscribers more next week on some what seems like going to be even more exciting episodes in the Skinwalker Ranch realm.
Right on. Could not have said it better myself, Roger. Thank you again. And folks, we will see you next week. See ya.